Hi, I'm Chris. Thanks for spending some time with me today. So my father died a year ago today, and thus the difficult conversation of grief. I'm finally finishing that year of births. The first Christmas without him, the first Easter, the first family get-together, his first birthday. All those firsts, and finally, the first anniversary of his death. My father was young when he died, 75, which seems old, but really it's not. It's young. And he was relatively healthy his entire life. It wasn't until he was diagnosed in cancer, which was in August. And then in September, he was diagnosed in stage 4 cancer, most presumably starting in the liver. But at that point, it had metastasized all over. My father was still working full-time, and even didn't quit his job even then. He just took family leave because he was so sure he was going to get better, and this was not the end. My father was a caregiver his entire life too, in a variety of different ways. In the end, he spent most of his life as a nurse. He was also a hospital administrator. He was in the Vietnam War as a nurse, and he loved nursing. He also worked nights most of my life as well. He is the one who taught me to cook. Probably my love of cooking comes from him. When he was in college, he worked at a pancake house, and that's how he made money before he went into the war. Got drafted into the war. So he died. So in September is when he was diagnosed with stage 4, and it wasn't really until the first part of November that he really started to get sick. I'm not sure that I would have done everything my father did. I think I would have wanted to go for quality instead of quantity, but my father was they were sure he was going to get better. So one of the things they did was he was doing an oral chemo and then doing radiation. And the first week of, I guess it must have been the first week of Thanksgiving or so, he was, or not Thanksgiving, but November, he was going to have his last radiation. It was a Monday, his last radiation treatment. And he had been in quite a bit of pain, and his sisters had been taking trips up, so to kind of spend the last time with them. So the last couple of weekends had been spent with family, which was wonderful. And it's really funny because one of the things I did was I cooked dinner, which seems fairly funny, but every single time my dad would be, you do know how to cook for a crowd, right? You do know how to cook for a crowd. And if you've ever seen in my cooking videos, if you see how much I cook for Kevin, you'll realize, yes, I have no problem cooking for a crowd. That was just my father, right? Did you remember this? Did you remember this? What about this? Or the one that always got me the most was sending me a text and then calling me to say that he sent a text to tell me to call him. Still saved that one phone call because it made me laugh so hard, but that was my father. So when he went in to have his last radiation treatment, he'd been having trouble swallowing. He really wasn't eating anymore. He wasn't drinking. It was just too painful. And so when they were in the hospital to get the radiation, they hopped over to the emergency room and discovered that he'd broken his neck. The radiation treatment, which is where they were doing to try and, one of the tumors was very large, and they were hoping to decrease that in order to make it feel better. But his bones were so weak at that point because of the fact that cancer had spread so far his body, that he ended up having his neck broken, and they ended up taking him to another hospital downtown that were like spinal care specialists. I don't think any of us knew that Monday that he was going in the hospital, that we'd never bring him home. That was the start of the end for him. It was a difficult decision to have the surgery. The spinal surgeon basically said, he's not strong enough for the surgery. And then on the other hand, if he didn't have the surgery, anything could just break his neck, and that would be it, which would create an even bigger issue. Wasn't eating, he's not drinking, something had to be done. So it took a couple of days, but the decision was on that Friday they were going to do surgery. And even that Friday morning before they did surgery, the doctor said, they wheeled him back and said, "Are you absolutely sure this is what you want to do?" And the decision was still, my dad still wanted to do this. Didn't matter that he was scared. He knew this was important. So he made it through the surgery, but at that point, he went into intensive care. Take my glasses off. He did feel better for a couple of days in intensive care, and it was hard because the nurses there were not trained to deal with cancer parts of him. They were only trained to deal with the surgery parts of him because of he was in the spinal care unit. This huge neck brace, which he had it, and having kept Dad, I was like, "Dad, I've had one of those, right? Remember I had to do the same thing?" But I knew things were bad. I knew by Monday that things were not going well at all for him. And I was really concerned. I noticed that he hadn't, he had a catheter in, he wasn't really peeing anymore, despite all the fluids they were pumping him with. His body had been swelling up, and they'd been, because of the fact that his kidneys were failing. And on Wednesday is the day I usually cook most of my Thanksgiving. My family we don't celebrate Thanksgiving together. We celebrate the Sunday after Thanksgiving so that the spouses can go wherever they need to go, and you don't feel like you have to be at 2 Thanksgivings in the whole bit. So I was preparing for the Thanksgiving that I host at my house. And I went back that night and sat with most of my siblings had gone back as well, just to say hello to him that next day. And Thursday morning, I went back, and my dad hadn't talked at all on Wednesday. He really wasn't lucid much at all. And Thursday morning I noticed there really was little to no response from him at all. And we've been asking the doctors and trying to get some idea of what was going on, and no one wants to tell you anything, and I understand that. But finally the doctor told us that morning, "Your father has hours to days to live." And I remember I'm the only one there with my stepmother, and the two of us are listening to this together, and I'm trying to process, okay, what do I do? I hadn't really shared with anybody that my father was sick. I'm incredibly private, and so I have a house full of people coming over for Thanksgiving who have no idea that I'm dealing with all this, and I really don't want to take it away. I know my one brother is going to stay with us this week, coming to the house as well, and we needed to make this not about that. So I got through Thanksgiving, and that night I went back and we sat with my father, and at that point they had decided to move him to another room. On Friday the decision was to move him to hospice room as opposed to a hospital bed because he wasn't going to wake up again. We really were just waiting patiently for him to die. And all of us had different schedules. Like I went every morning because I passed right by the hospital on my way to work and would stop in the morning and spend time. One of my sisters would stop after she dropped the kids off at school and hang out. My brother would stop when he could. My other sister would stop after work, after she dealt with dinner. So there was always somebody there with him. And then we took turns spending the night with him as well. So that Saturday morning, I remember driving down at about 7 o'clock because I'm a morning person and thinking, I'm driving for the last time to spend time with my dad. I know that. I know today's the day. And at about 10:15, my stepmother says, we've been talking and his breathing had changed. She said, you need to go call your siblings. You need to go call your brothers and sisters because they need to get here. It's time. And that's a difficult set of phone conversations to make. My one sister's at the grocery store. I have another one who lives about a half hour away. My brother was not home as well and had my nephew with him, and the last thing you wanted to do is to bring a 5-year-old to the hospital while this is happening. And in the end, it was just myself and my stepmother there. I am blessed to have been able to be there for that particular moment and to be with my father when he took those last breaths. But at the same time, it was incredibly painful when the rest of the family came through and realized that he'd already gone. I am blessed in so many ways. My father was... I was a 50-year-old woman who still called her dad, Daddy, every time. Hi, Daddy. Love you, Daddy. That's what I did. And that's who he was to me, was my daddy. And that's not to say that we didn't have our issues through the years. Everybody does. I remember when he figured out I had my first tattoo. I was in my late 40s. And I don't know that I hadn't not told them or hid it or anything. But I remember sitting at a family dinner. He's like, will you pull up your pants? What is going on? And he showed him and he looks at me. You know that's permanent. It's not coming off. Dad, I know it's permanent. It's not coming off. He really was. He loved to make us laugh and smile. And it's been hard sitting in this kitchen because it was his kitchen and he knew his way around the kitchen and he directed it all. I'm very grateful for the time I might have been really tired those last 2 weeks. I hadn't even tell. I remember on Monday going to work because we weren't doing visitation until Tuesday and the funeral wasn't until Wednesday. I remember going to work on Monday and I told my boss that my father died, but I didn't tell any of my rest of my colleagues at all. Because one, I didn't want them to feel obligated to have to go to the funeral home. I didn't want any of that because that's what happened. People feel obligated to go. But the one thing that I was not prepared for was the newspaper, the obituary. I don't know anybody who reads a newspaper anymore, but I have friends who read the newspaper, and there were people that showed up that I least expected to be there. My whole purpose was to ensure the fact that my sisters were taken care of, my stepmother was taken care of, that everybody was cared for, because that's what they needed. They needed me to be the oldest sibling. I remember discussing the funeral and all along, leading up to all this, my brother had said all along, I want to do the eulogy. I'm the oldest son, I'm the only son, the last of the name, yada yada. I need to do this. And sitting around the dining room table that Saturday planning the funeral, and my brother looks, he's like, I'm not doing it. I can't get up there and talk. And my sister says, oh, Christine will do it. She does public speaking all the time. And I kept thinking to myself, I don't know that I have much practice of doing something at my father's funeral. It's not really the same thing as public speaking. But I knew that's what they needed. They needed me to be that older sister, the one that took charge and kept going. And it's interesting to me. I understand words of comfort that people want to say to you. And it wasn't actually until I was experiencing that I realized, gosh, just don't say it. I have a conversation with me, but don't feel the need, it's in a better place, all that stuff. Yeah, we all know that. But you don't need to say it. And it's hard to be gracious after a while when you're just tired of idle chit chat with people because they just want to make sure you're taken care of, and you're so blessed because they do want to take care of you. It's difficult to be there. And the funeral was surreal. And I really hadn't processed much of it, cried or done anything else until those last 2 minutes when we were saying goodbye at the gravesite, and myself and my siblings are around the casket, and I realized that was it. We were about to lower him in the ground, and I wasn't going to see him anymore. And I kind of lost it, which was very upsetting for my siblings because they hadn't seen me do that. Even now, there are days when I get overwhelmed with grief, and I miss him so. And I'm glad there we are at the end of our year of the lass. I don't know. I'd like to think my father was proud of me. There are days when I wonder. He loved the grandkids, and I didn't have grandkids. I don't think that. I don't think that was a reflection on me by any means. But I often wonder because I never asked. Never really knew. I knew he loved me, but there are those things that I have unresolved. I know no two people experience grief in the same way. But we all do experience grief. And however we do it, it's okay. That's what I want to get across. Each of us have our stories. And it's okay to talk about being sad, having grief. I'm finally feeling that closure of my first doves. And I think I just wanted to do something to honor my father, the man that I adored, who took care of me for 52 years. Dad, I love you. You'll always be my daddy. Thank you for spending some time with me and listening to my story, and be happy if you want to share some of your stories about grief, or even a little how it helped you to move forward. Like I said, I'm glad that I've come to the end of my year. Thank you for coming along today.